The charcoal moved across the paper in careful strokes, capturing the delicate curve of a rare orchid petal. I'd been documenting this particular specimen for 3 hours now, my back aching from hunching over the drafting table. But I couldn't stop. Not when the afternoon light hit the translucent white petals just right, revealing veins like rivers on a map. My phone buzzed for the 4th time. I ignored it, just as I'd ignored the previous 3 calls. I knew who it was. I knew what he wanted. And I knew that answering would shatter the fragile peace I'd built in this small studio apartment that smelled of paper and pressed flowers. The buzzing stopped. Started again immediately. With a sigh that came from somewhere deep in my chest, I set down the charcoal and picked up the phone. "Papa." "Milena." My father's voice was thin, stretched tight with fear. "You need to come home. Now." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What happened? Just come, please." The line went dead. I stared at my half-finished illustration, at the orchid that would wilt before morning, at the careful notes in the margins about pigmentation and light refraction. My entire world existed in these details, in the quiet documentation of beauty that most people overlooked. 20 minutes later, I stood in my childhood home, a modest house in the suburbs that my mother had filled with potted plants before cancer took her 5 years ago. My father sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, and across from him sat a man I'd never seen before. The stranger wore an expensive suit that didn't quite conceal the gun holstered beneath his jacket. His face was hard, weathered, the kind that had seen things I could only imagine from the safety of my botanical gardens. "Milena." My father looked up, and I barely recognized him. He'd aged a decade since I'd seen him 3 weeks ago. "This is Alexei. He works for Marko Petrovich," the man finished. His accent was thick, Eastern European. "You know this name, yes?" I did. Everyone in the city knew that name, even those of us who lived in the quiet corners, cataloging flowers. Marko Petrovich owned the docks, the construction companies, the politicians. He owned fear itself. "What does he want with us?" I asked, though dread was already settling into my bones. My father's voice broke. "I owed money. For your mother's treatments. For the house. I thought I could pay it back, but the interest..." "How much?" 300,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I earned 35,000 a year documenting plants for the Botanical Society. My father's pension was modest. We'd never see that kind of money. "Mr. Petrovich has made an offer," Alexei said, his tone businesslike. "A generous offer, considering the circumstances." "What offer?" I heard my voice as if from a distance, already knowing somehow that my life was about to split into before and after. "Marriage." The word was simple. Final. "He needs a wife," Alexei continued. "For appearances. His business associates, they prefer to deal with family men, stable men. You marry him, your father's debt disappears. You get a house, security, everything you need. It's business. I'm not a business transaction. Everyone is a business transaction, Miss Milena. The question is whether you're a good one or a bad one. For your father's sake, I hope you're good." I looked at Papa, at the man who'd read me stories about botanical explorers, who'd encouraged my obsession with capturing the invisible details of petals and stems. The man who was now asking me to sacrifice myself on the altar of his mistakes. If I refuse? Alexei's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then we collect what we're owed in other ways. Your father is old, but his organs still have value on certain markets, and you..." His gaze traveled over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Young women always have value." "Milena, please." My father's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I never meant..." "Don't." I cut him off, my voice steadier than I felt. When does he want an answer? Now. Of course. Men like Marko Petrovich didn't wait. They took. I thought about my studio apartment, my unfinished illustrations, the orchid that would be dead by morning. I thought about the botanical expedition I was supposed to join next month, documenting rare alpine flora. I thought about freedom. Then I looked at my father and knew I'd already made my choice. Fine. I'll marry him. The wedding was held 3 days later in a courthouse downtown. I wore a simple white dress I'd bought at a department store the day before. No veil, no flowers, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. A contract written in desperation and signed in surrender. Marko Petrovich stood at the altar in a black suit that probably cost more than my car. He was taller than I'd expected, with dark hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so cold. His eyes were the gray of winter storms, and when they landed on me, I felt assessed, catalogued, and dismissed in the span of a heartbeat. We'd met exactly once before the ceremony, a 5-minute conversation in which his lawyer outlined the terms of our arrangement. I would live in his house. I would appear at his side when required. I would not embarrass him. In return, my father's debt was forgiven, and I would receive a monthly allowance that was more than I'd made in a year. We did not discuss love. We did not discuss intimacy. We did not discuss anything that resembled an actual marriage. Do you, Milena, take this man? I do. My voice was clear. I would not cry. I would not show weakness. If I was being sold, I would at least maintain my dignity. Do you, Marko, take this woman? Da. Yes. The single word in his native tongue, as if he couldn't be bothered to speak English for this charade. I now pronounce you husband and wife. There was no kiss. Marko turned away before the officiant finished speaking, already reaching for his phone. Business calls that couldn't wait, even for the pantomime of his own wedding. I stood there, a gold band burning on my finger, and wondered what exactly I'd just become. The reception was held at an exclusive restaurant I'd never heard of, filled with men in expensive suits and women dripping in diamonds. I sat at the head table, Marko's new wife, his latest acquisition. He barely looked at me, spending the evening in deep conversation with men whose eyes were as hard as his. You're the artist, a woman said, sliding into the chair next to me. She was perhaps 60, elegant in the way only old money could achieve. Marko mentioned you illustrate plants. Botanical documentation, I corrected automatically. I worked with the State Botanical Society. Worked? I gestured vaguely at the room, at my new reality. I assume I'll be too busy being Mrs. Petrovich now. Her laugh was soft, almost pitying. Oh, darling, you'll have more time than you know what to do with. Marko doesn't believe in wives who work, but he also doesn't believe in wives who exist. You'll be invisible in a house full of people. She patted my hand and drifted away, leaving me with a prophecy that would prove devastatingly accurate. That night, Marko brought me to his mansion, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. He showed me to a guest room on the 2nd floor. Your room? He said simply. And yours? 3rd floor. You won't be disturbed. He closed the door before I could respond, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed in my wedding dress, a ring on my finger and a stranger for a husband, and finally let myself cry. 3 months into my marriage, I could count on one hand the number of times Marko had spoken directly to me. Our conversations consisted of brief exchanges about appearances, galas he needed me to attend, dinners where I was expected to sit silently and look presentable, charity events where I played the role of devoted wife to an audience who would never know the truth. I learned the rules quickly. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions about his business. Don't expect him at meals. Don't wait up. Don't hope. The mansion became my gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. I spent my days in the studio I'd set up in the sunroom, the one concession Marco had made when I'd asked, through his assistant, if I could have a space to work. He'd agreed with the same disinterest he showed everything about me, as long as I didn't make a mess or interfere with household operations. So I worked. I documented every plant in the mansion's extensive gardens. I corresponded with colleagues from the Botanical Society who pitied me in polite, professional emails. I lost myself in the minute details of leaf veins and petal structures, in the peaceful silence of charcoal on paper. The household staff treated me with careful courtesy that barely masked their confusion. They'd worked for Marco for years, had seen him operate with ruthless efficiency in every aspect of his life. And now he had a wife he ignored so completely, she might as well have been a piece of furniture. "Mrs. Petrovich," Maria, the housekeeper, would say gently, "Would you like dinner in the dining room tonight?" "No, thank you. I'll eat in my studio." Because eating alone in a room designed for 12 was too stark a reminder of exactly how alone I was. At night, I would hear Marco return from wherever his business took him. His footsteps would climb the stairs, pause briefly on the second-floor landing as if he might knock on my door, then continue up to the third floor. The pattern never varied. We were strangers living in the same house, bound by a contract neither of us had wanted. The galas were the worst. Marco would appear at my door 15 minutes before we were due to leave, his expression unreadable as he assessed whatever dress I'd chosen. "That will do," he'd say, as if I were a servant who'd completed a task adequately. At the events, he would place his hand at the small of my back, the only time he touched me, guiding me through crowds of powerful men and beautiful women. He would introduce me with the same dispassionate tone he used for everything. "My wife, Milena." I learned to smile through those introductions, to make small talk with wives who had real marriages, to pretend I belonged in their world of luxury and lies. "Your husband is very devoted to you," one woman said at a charity auction, watching Marco cross the room toward us. "The way he looks at you." I wanted to laugh. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me, checking that his newest acquisition was performing adequately. "We're very happy," I lied, the words tasting like ash. One night, 6 months into our arrangement, I made the mistake of asking him a direct question. We'd returned from a gala where I'd overheard fragments of conversation. Something about a shipment, a competitor, veiled threats wrapped in business language. "Marco," I said as he walked toward the stairs, "can I ask you something?" He paused, his back to me. "What?" Not a question. A wall. "The man tonight. Stanislav. He seemed angry with you. That's not your concern." "I'm just trying to understand." He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes made me step back. "Understand what exactly?" "Your role is simple, Milena. Look presentable. Don't embarrass me. Everything else is none of your business." "I'm your wife." "You're a solution to a problem." His voice was flat, factual. "Your father owed money. I needed a wife for appearance's sake. We made a transaction. Don't confuse that with what actual marriages are." The words hit like physical blows, stripping away whatever foolish hope I'd been harboring that eventually, maybe, we could find something resembling companionship in this arrangement. "I see," I managed. "Good. Now go to bed. We have the Volkov reception tomorrow night." He climbed the stairs without looking back. I returned to my room and didn't cry. I'd learned not to waste tears on a man incapable of seeing them. The seasons changed. Summer gave way to fall to winter. The garden I'd been documenting withered and slept. I filled sketchbook after sketchbook with dried specimens, with memories of growth captured in graphite and ink. My father called weakly, his voice thick with guilt I refused to absolve. "Are you happy?" he'd ask. "I'm fine," I'd lie. Because what good would the truth do? The debt was paid. Papa was safe. That had been the point of all this. On our 1-year anniversary, Marco didn't acknowledge it. I spent the day in my studio, drawing the frost patterns on the window panes, finding beauty in the cold. That night, there was an incident. I never learned the details, only heard the shouting from the first floor, the sound of breaking glass, Marco's voice sharp with rage in a language I didn't understand. Later, much later, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. But instead of continuing to the third floor, they stopped outside my door. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. I opened the door to find him standing there, his suit jacket gone, his shirt partially unbuttoned. There was a cut above his eyebrow, already swelling, and his eyes were unfocused in a way I'd never seen. Marco? Milena. My name on his lips, slurred slightly. He'd been drinking. Can I? He swayed slightly, caught himself against the doorframe. You're hurt. Let me. He was inside my room before I could finish the sentence, his hands suddenly on my face, tilting my chin up. His eyes roamed over my features as if seeing me for the first time. You're beautiful, he murmured in his native tongue, the words thick with alcohol and something that might have been wonder. Why didn't I see that before? Marco, you're drunk. You should. His mouth was on mine before I could finish, desperate and seeking, tasting of expensive whiskey and desperation. His hands tangled in my hair, pulling me against him with a hunger that was as terrifying as it was unexpected. I should have pushed him away, should have reminded him of the rules of our arrangement, of the careful distance we'd maintained. But I was so starved for human touch, for any acknowledgement that I existed, that I found myself responding, my hands fisting in his shirt. What followed was frantic and artless, neither of us speaking, the darkness hiding whatever emotions played across our faces. It was not tender. It was not love. It was two lonely people seeking warmth in the cold. Afterwards, he fell asleep almost immediately, his breathing deep and even. I lay awake beside him, my husband for the first time in truth, if not in spirit, and wondered what the morning would bring. Morning brought exactly what I'd feared. Nothing. I woke to an empty bed, the sheets beside me cool. Marco was gone as if the night had never happened, as if he hadn't touched me with desperate hands and whispered words in a language I didn't understand. The routine resumed with brutal normalcy. He didn't mention it, didn't acknowledge me at breakfast the few times our schedules overlapped. The careful distance he'd maintained for a year reasserted itself like ice reforming after a brief thaw. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself I hadn't expected anything different. But somewhere deep in my chest, a small, foolish part of me had hoped that maybe, finally, something had shifted. It hadn't. 2 months passed. Then 3. The winter gave way to early spring, and I spent long hours in the gardens, sketching the first crocuses pushing through the melting snow. Life persisting despite the cold. A metaphor so obvious it hurt. It was Maria who noticed first. Mrs. Petrovich, she said gently one morning as I picked at my breakfast, my stomach roiling with nausea I'd been attributing to stress. Perhaps you should see a doctor. I'm fine, just tired. Her expression was knowing, maternal. Please, for me, let me call Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen confirmed what part of me had already known, had been avoiding acknowledging. I was pregnant. 8 weeks along. The news hit me with the force of a physical blow. A child. Marco's child. Conceived during our one night together, that desperate collision in the dark. I sat in Dr. Chen's office, her gentle voice outlining prenatal care and vitamins, and felt my carefully constructed emotional walls crack. Does your husband know you're here? She asked. No. Would you like me to call him? No, I said again, more firmly. Please, this stays between us. She nodded, her professional discretion absolute, but I saw the concern in her eyes. She knew who Marco Petrovich was. She knew what kind of marriage we had. For 2 weeks, I carried the secret like a stone. I continued my illustrations, attended the required social events, played my role. And all the while, a life grew inside me, a tiny spark of warmth in the frozen landscape of my marriage. I should have been terrified. In many ways I was. But there was something else too. A fierce, protective love that surprised me with its intensity. This child was mine. Whatever else was true, whatever happened next, this child was mine. The decision crystallized slowly, then all at once. I couldn't stay. Couldn't raise a child in this cold, loveless house, watched but not seen, acknowledged but not cherished. My child deserved more than to be another acquisition in Marco's collection. I began planning carefully, small withdrawals from my monthly allowance, squirreled away over weeks. Contact with a friend from the Botanical Society who'd moved to Oregon, who didn't ask questions when I inquired about positions there. A storage unit where I could keep my important possessions, my sketchbooks and reference materials. I would leave after the next gala. One final performance, and then I would disappear into a new life, a new name, somewhere Marco's reach couldn't extend. The night of the gala arrived. I dressed carefully in a black gown that was loose enough to hide the slight curve of my belly, still subtle at 11 weeks, barely noticeable. I touched up my makeup, covering the shadows under my eyes that had become permanent fixtures. Marco appeared at my door, as always, 15 minutes before departure. But tonight, his gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, his brow furrowing slightly. "You look different," he said, the first personal observation he'd made in months. "Different how?" He shook his head, dismissing whatever he'd noticed. "Never mind. Let's go." The gala was like all the others. Glittering people in glittering clothes. Champagne I couldn't drink but held for appearance's sake. Conversations about nothing and everything. Marco's hand at the small of my back. Cold and impersonal. I made my rounds, said my goodbyes to the few people I'd come to know over the past year, though they didn't know they were goodbyes. This was my last performance, my final act in this particular play. "You seem different tonight," one of the other wives observed. "Happier, maybe?" I smiled, thinking of my packed bags hidden in the back of my closet, of the bus ticket in my purse. "Do I?" "Whatever it is, it suits you." If only she knew. The gala was winding down when it happened. Marco was engaged in conversation with a man I didn't recognize, their voices low and intense. I stood beside him, the invisible wife, when suddenly his hand tightened on my waist. Not the casual touch of guidance, but something urgent, almost protective. "Excuse us," he said abruptly, pulling me away from the conversation. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Time to leave." But his eyes scanned the room constantly, and his hand remained firm on my waist as he hustled me toward the exit. Alexei and 2 other security men materialized from nowhere, forming a protective formation around us. "Marco, what's happening?" "Get in the car, now." His tone brooked no argument. I slid into the back of the Bentley, my heart racing. Marco followed, Alexei in the front seat, and we pulled away from the hotel with an urgency that bordered on reckless. "Talk to me," I demanded. "What just happened?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, there was a threat. Against me. Someone in that room was carrying. Carrying what? "A gun, Milena. Someone came to that gala planning to kill me." The words hung in the air between us. This was his world, I realized with cold clarity. This constant danger, the violence lurking beneath the expensive suits and polite conversation. This was what I was escaping, what I refused to raise my child around. Are you... "I'm fine. Alexei's men handled it." He rubbed his face, the gesture weary. You're safe. That's what matters. The unexpected concern in his voice caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear, not for himself, but for me. Marco, when we get home, I want you to stay in your room. Lock the door. There may be retaliation. This is your life, I said quietly. Every day. This danger. He met my eyes, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him truly look at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. Yes. I can't. I started, then caught myself. I'd almost revealed my plans, almost told him I was leaving. Can't what? Nothing. I'm just tired. But something in his expression shifted, sharpened. He was a predator by nature, by training. He sensed blood in the water. The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. When we arrived at the mansion, Marco escorted me personally to my room, checking it himself before allowing me to enter. Lock the door, he repeated. I'll have men stationed in the hallway. You're being paranoid. I'm being careful. There's a difference. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the doorframe. Milena. Yes? Are you happy here? The question blindsided me. In a 1.5 years of marriage, he'd never asked about my feelings, my state of mind, anything beyond whether I was adequately performing my role. Why are you asking me that now? Because you seem... He struggled for the word. Different. Like you've made a decision about something. My heart hammered. Could he sense my plans? I'm fine. He studied me for a long moment, and I fought to keep my expression neutral. Finally, he nodded. Lock the door. He left, and I did as instructed, my hands shaking. Had I been that obvious? Did he suspect? I looked at my closet, at the packed bags hidden behind winter coats, at the bus ticket in my purse. Tomorrow. I would leave tomorrow before he figured it out. I lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, too wired to sleep, planning out my escape route in meticulous detail. I never heard him come back. The first I knew of his presence was his weight settling onto the bed beside me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. I startled awake, my hand instinctively moving to protect my still flat stomach. Shh, he murmured. It's just me. Marco? What are you? I couldn't sleep. His voice was rough, strained. Kept thinking about what could have happened tonight. If Alexei hadn't spotted him. If the timing had been different. I sat up slowly, confused by this vulnerability, this crack in his armor. But nothing happened. You're safe. Am I? He laughed, the sound bitter. I'm never safe, Milena. That's the price of my life. But you shouldn't have to pay that price. I don't understand what you're saying. He turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the window, I saw something raw in his expression. Tell me the truth. Are you planning to leave me? My breath caught. Don't lie, please. Not about this. The please undid me. In 18 months of marriage, I'd never heard him say that word to me. Never heard anything approaching a request, rather than a command. Yes, I whispered. I was going to leave tomorrow. He closed his eyes, a muscle in his jaw working. Why? Why? I nearly laughed at the absurdity of the question. Marco, we're not married. Not really. We're two strangers living in the same house, going through the motions of something that doesn't exist. Is that truly how you see us? How else should I see it? You ignore me. You treat me like a piece of furniture. The only time you've touched me in 18 months was when you were drunk and hurting. My voice cracked despite my attempt to remain composed. I can't live like this anymore. There's more, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. I hesitated, my hand moving unconsciously to my stomach. His eyes tracked the movement, and I saw the exact moment understanding dawned. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. Yes. How long have you known? 2 weeks. And you were going to leave without telling me. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. You were going to take my child and disappear. Your child? I found myself angry now, all the suppressed emotion of the past year boiling to the surface. When have you ever cared about me enough to call this child yours? When have you ever seen me as anything more than an obligation? I see you. No, you don't. You look through me. I see you! His shout startled us both. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked not to see you? What does that even mean? It means... He turned back to me, and the look in his eyes was anguished. It means I married you for convenience, for appearances. I wasn't supposed morning brought exactly what I'd feared. Nothing. I woke to an empty bed, the sheets beside me cool. Marco was gone as if the night had never happened, as if he hadn't touched me with desperate hands and whispered words in a language I didn't understand. The routine resumed with brutal normalcy. He didn't mention it, didn't acknowledge me at breakfast the few times our schedules overlapped. The careful distance he'd maintained for a year reasserted itself like ice reforming after a brief thaw. I told myself it didn't matter. Told myself I hadn't expected anything different. But somewhere deep in my chest, a small, foolish part of me had hoped that maybe, finally, something had shifted. It hadn't. 2 months passed. Then 3. The winter gave way to early spring, and I spent long hours in the gardens, sketching the first crocuses pushing through the melting snow, life persisting despite the cold. A metaphor so obvious it hurt. It was Maria who noticed first. Mrs. Petrovich, she said gently one morning as I picked at my breakfast, my stomach roiling with nausea I'd been attributing to stress. Perhaps you should see a doctor. I'm fine, just tired. Her expression was knowing, maternal. Please, for me, let me call Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen confirmed what part of me had already known, had been avoiding acknowledging. I was pregnant. 8 weeks along. The news hit me with the force of a physical blow. A child. Marco's child. Conceived during our one night together, that desperate collision in the dark. I sat in Dr. Chen's office, her gentle voice outlining prenatal care and vitamins, and felt my carefully constructed emotional walls crack. Does your husband know you're here? She asked. No. Would you like me to call him? No, I said again, more firmly. Please, this stays between us. She nodded, her professional discretion absolute, but I saw the concern in her eyes. She knew who Marco Petrovich was. She knew what kind of marriage we had. For 2 weeks, I carried the secret like a stone. I continued my illustrations, attended the required social events, played my role. And all the while, a life grew inside me, a tiny spark of warmth in the frozen landscape of my marriage. I should have been terrified. In many ways I was. But there was something else too. A fierce, protective love that surprised me with its intensity. This child was mine. Whatever else was true, whatever happened next, this child was mine. The decision crystallized slowly, then all at once. I couldn't stay. Couldn't raise a child in this cold, loveless house, watched but not seen, acknowledged but not cherished. My child deserved more than to be another acquisition in Marco's collection. I began planning carefully. Small withdrawals from my monthly allowance, squirreled away over weeks. Contact with a friend from the Botanical Society who'd moved to Oregon, who didn't ask questions when I inquired about positions there. A storage unit where I could keep my important possessions, my sketchbooks and reference materials. I would leave after the next gala. One final performance, and then I would disappear into a new life, a new name, somewhere Marco's reach couldn't extend. The night of the gala arrived. I dressed carefully in a black gown that was loose enough to hide the slight curve of my belly, still subtle at 11 weeks, barely noticeable. I touched up my makeup, covering the shadows under my eyes that had become permanent fixtures. Marco appeared at my door, as always, 15 minutes before departure. But tonight, his gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, his brow furrowing slightly. "You look different," he said, the first personal observation he'd made in months. "Different how?" He shook his head, dismissing whatever he'd noticed. "Never mind, let's go." The gala was like all the others. Glittering people in glittering clothes. Champagne I couldn't drink but held for appearance's sake. Conversations about nothing and everything. Marco's hand at the small of my back. Cold and impersonal. I made my rounds, said my goodbyes to the few people I'd come to know over the past year, though they didn't know they were goodbyes. This was my last performance, my final act in this particular play. "You seem different tonight," one of the other wives observed. "Happier, maybe?" I smiled, thinking of my packed bags hidden in the back of my closet, of the bus ticket in my purse. "Do I?" "Whatever it is, it suits you." If only she knew. The gala was winding down when it happened. Marco was engaged in conversation with a man I didn't recognize, their voices low and intense. I stood beside him, the invisible wife, when suddenly his hand tightened on my waist. Not the casual touch of guidance, but something urgent, almost protective. "Excuse us," he said abruptly, pulling me away from the conversation. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Time to leave." But his eyes scanned the room constantly, and his hand remained firm on my waist as he hustled me toward the exit. Alexei and 2 other security men materialized from nowhere, forming a protective formation around us. "Marco, what's happening?" "Get in the car, now." His tone brooked no argument. I slid into the back of the Bentley, my heart racing. Marco followed, Alexei in the front seat, and we pulled away from the hotel with an urgency that bordered on reckless. "Talk to me," I demanded. "What just happened?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, there was a threat. Against me. Someone in that room was carrying. Carrying what? "A gun, Milena. Someone came to that gala planning to kill me." The words hung in the air between us. This was his world, I realized with cold clarity. This constant danger, the violence lurking beneath the expensive suits and polite conversation. This was what I was escaping, what I refused to raise my child around. Are you? "I'm fine." Alexei's men handled it. He rubbed his face, the gesture weary. "You're safe. That's what matters." The unexpected concern in his voice caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear, not for himself, but for me. "Marco, when we get home, I want you to stay in your room. Lock the door. There may be retaliation." "This is your life," I said quietly. "Every day. This danger." He met my eyes, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw him truly look at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. "Yes. I can't." I started, then caught myself. I'd almost revealed my plans, almost told him I was leaving. "Can't what?" "Nothing. I'm just tired." But something in his expression shifted, sharpened. He was a predator by nature, by training. He sensed blood in the water. The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. When we arrived at the mansion, Marco escorted me personally to my room, checking it himself before allowing me to enter. "Lock the door," he repeated. "I'll have men stationed in the hallway. You're being paranoid." "I'm being careful. There's a difference." He paused at the threshold, his hand on the door frame. "Milena." "Yes? Are you happy here?" The question blindsided me. In a year and a half of marriage, he'd never asked about my feelings, my state of mind, anything beyond whether I was adequately performing my role. "Why are you asking me that now?" "Because you seem..." He struggled for the word. "Different. Like you've made a decision about something." My heart hammered. Could he sense my plans? "I'm fine." He studied me for a long moment, and I fought to keep my expression neutral. Finally, he nodded. "Lock the door." He left, and I did as instructed, my hands shaking. Had I been that obvious? Did he suspect? I looked at my closet, at the packed bags hidden behind winter coats, at the bus ticket in my purse. Tomorrow. I would leave tomorrow before he figured it out. I lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, too wired to sleep, planning out my escape route in meticulous detail. The bus left at 6 in the morning. I'd slip out before dawn, before the household stirred, before Marco's security detail changed shifts. Maria would find my note hours later. By then, I'd be states away. I never heard him come back. The first I knew of his presence was his weight settling onto the bed beside me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. I startled awake, disoriented, my hand instinctively moving to protect my still flat stomach. "Shh," he murmured. "It's just me." "Marco, what are you..." It must be past midnight. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't sleep. His voice was rough, strained in a way I'd never heard. Kept thinking about what could have happened tonight, if Alexei hadn't spotted him, if the timing had been different, if that bullet had found its mark. I sat up slowly, confused by this vulnerability, this crack in his impenetrable armor. But nothing happened. "You're safe. We're both safe." "Am I?" He laughed, the sound bitter and hollow in the darkness. "I'm never safe, Milena. That's the price of my life, the cost of the choices I made long before I met you. But you shouldn't have to pay that price. You never should have been dragged into this world." "I don't understand what you're saying." He turned to look at me, and in the dim light filtering through the curtains, I saw something raw and unguarded in his expression, something that looked almost like anguish. "Tell me the truth. Are you planning to leave me?" My breath caught in my throat. The packed bags, the bus ticket, the carefully laid plans. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Don't lie. Please. Not about this." The please broke something in me. In 18 months of marriage, I'd never heard that word cross his lips. Never heard anything approaching a request, rather than a command. "Yes," I whispered, the admission escaping before I could stop it. "I was going to leave tomorrow morning." He closed his eyes, as if absorbing a physical blow, a muscle in his jaw working. When he opened them again, the pain there was palpable. "Why? Why?" I nearly laughed at the absurdity of the question. "Marco, we're not married. Not really. We're two strangers living in the same house, going through the motions of something that doesn't exist, and never did. Is that truly how you see us? How else should I see it? You ignore me. You treat me like a piece of furniture, like something decorative but ultimately meaningless. The only time you've touched me in 18 months was when you were drunk and hurting, and even then, you pretended it never happened." My voice cracked despite my desperate attempt to remain composed. "I can't live like this anymore. I won't. There's more, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. I hesitated, my hand moving unconsciously to my stomach again. His eyes tracked the movement with predatory focus, and I saw the exact moment understanding dawned in those gray depths. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty he brought to all his business dealings. Yes. How long have you known? 2 weeks. Maybe a little more. And you were going to leave without telling me. His voice was flat, carefully controlled in that dangerous way that meant his emotions were anything but. You were going to take my child and disappear into whatever new life you'd planned. Your child? I found myself angry now, all the suppressed emotion of the past year and a half boiling to the surface like a geyser. When have you ever cared about me enough to call this child yours? When have you ever seen me as anything more than an obligation, a checkbox on your list of requirements for appearing legitimate? I see you. No, you don't. You look through me like I'm glass, like I'm nothing. I see you! His shout startled us both, echoing off the walls of my carefully decorated prison. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window like a caged animal, his shoulders rigid with a tension that spoke of barely controlled fury. Or maybe desperation. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked not to see you? How much energy it's taken to pretend you don't exist? What does that even mean? It means... He turned back to me, and the look in his eyes was anguished, stripped of every defense he'd erected. It means I married you for convenience, for appearances, for practical reasons that had nothing to do with wanting a wife. I wasn't supposed to care. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. And do you? My voice was barely a whisper. Feel anything? His laugh was broken, defeated. That's the problem, Milena. I feel everything. The confession hung in the air between us, fragile and dangerous as spun glass. What are you saying? I asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt at composure. Marco ran both hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd never seen from him. The carefully controlled facade he showed the world was crumbling, and beneath it was a man I didn't recognize. I'm saying that ignoring you was self-preservation, that keeping you at arm's length was the only way I could maintain the distance this arrangement required. He moved closer, his gaze intense. But it hasn't worked. Not for months. Maybe not ever. You have a strange way of showing interest in someone. Complete emotional absence isn't typically how. I know. He cut me off, his voice rough. I know how it looks, how it's been. But every time I saw you in that sunroom with your sketches, every time you smiled at Maria or laughed at something you were reading, every time you played your role perfectly at those god-awful galas. He broke off, struggling for words. You were never supposed to be real to me, but I am real. Yes. The word was quiet, heavy with meaning. And now you're carrying my child and planning to disappear, and I realize that losing you both might actually destroy me. I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. You don't even know me, Marco. Not really. I know you hate mornings, but force yourself up early to catch the best light for your work. I know you take your tea with honey because sugar reminds you of your mother's funeral, when people brought too many sweet things. I know you're terrified of thunderstorms, but you'll stand at the window during them anyway, like you're daring your fear to win. His voice softened. I know you deserve so much better than what I've given you. The casual recitation of details I'd never realized he'd noticed left me breathless. You paid attention. I couldn't help it, even when I was trying not to. That night, I whispered, when you came to my room. You remembered, didn't you? The next morning, you remembered everything. His expression confirmed it. Yes. Then why did you pretend it never happened? Why did you go back to ignoring me? Because I didn't know what else to do. He sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. My entire life is built on control, Milena. Every action calculated, every emotion buried. And then I touched you. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I felt completely out of control. It terrified me. I sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance despite the pull to move closer. So you shut me out. So I shut you out, he agreed, like a coward. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 18 months of misunderstanding heavy between us. The baby, he said finally. Are you healthy? Is everything all right? Dr. Chen says everything looks normal. I'm almost 12 weeks now. 12 weeks. He absorbed this, his hand moving as if to touch my stomach, then hesitating. May I? I nodded, unable to speak. His palm settled against my abdomen, warm through the thin fabric of my dress. There was nothing to feel yet. No movement, no visible proof. But his touch was gentle, reverent in a way that made my eyes sting with tears I refused to shed. I've been so stupid, he murmured. So focused on maintaining distance that I almost lost everything that matters. What are you asking me, Marco? He looked up, meeting my eyes. I'm asking you to stay. Not as an arrangement, not as a contract, but as my wife. Really my wife. Let me try to be the husband you deserved from the beginning. You're asking me to bet my future and my child's future on the possibility that you might learn to care. No. His voice was firm. I'm telling you I already care. More than I knew how to handle. I'm asking you to let me prove it. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to. But 1.5 years of loneliness had built walls that couldn't be dismantled by a single conversation in the dark. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted. Trust you. Trust this. What happens when the novelty wears off? When you remember why you kept me at a distance in the first place? That won't happen. You can't promise that. You're right. He surprised me by agreeing. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise this will be easy. But I can promise I'll try. Every day. I'll try to be what you and our child need. Why now? I asked, the question that had been haunting me. Why does it matter now when it didn't matter for 18 months? Because I almost lost you tonight. His voice was raw. When I realized someone in that room wanted me dead, my first thought wasn't for myself. It was for you. What would happen to you if something happened to me? And then I came home and felt this distance between us. This wall you'd built. And I knew. I knew you were leaving. And I realized that losing you to my own cowardice would be worse than any bullet. The vulnerability in his admission cracked something in my carefully guarded heart. I can't just forget the last 1.5 years, I said quietly. I can't pretend the loneliness didn't happen, that the isolation didn't hurt. I would never ask you to forget, only to let me try to make up for it. How? He seemed to consider this, his hand still resting on my stomach. I could start by moving into this room, by actually sharing a life with you instead of existing in parallel, by being present instead of absent. That's terrifying, for both of us. His smile was slight, sad. I've spent so long keeping people at a distance. I'm not sure I remember how to let someone in, but I want to learn. With you. I looked at this man who had been a stranger, then an obligation, now revealing himself as something infinitely more complex, flawed and damaged, and desperately trying to reach across the chasm he'd created. I was going to leave on the 6 a.m. bus, I told him. I have a friend in Oregon who said I could stay with her. She has a small botanical illustration business. I was going to help her, raise the baby somewhere quiet and safe. Oregon. He absorbed this. You had it all planned. I had to. I couldn't stay in this frozen marriage anymore. Not with a child coming. Not when I needed warmth and couldn't find any here. And now? I took a deep breath, weighing options that all felt impossible. Trust him and risk being hurt again. Leave and always wonder what might have been. Stay in this liminal space between hope and despair. Now, I said slowly, I need to see proof, not words. Actions, consistency. How long? I don't know. As long as it takes. If you slip back into old patterns, if you retreat behind your walls again, I'm gone. And I won't come back. He nodded, accepting the terms without argument. That's fair. And I want my own space still. You don't just move in and take over. We build this slowly. You earn your way back in. Understood. And honesty. Complete honesty. About your business, about the dangers, about everything. I won't raise a child in a house full of secrets. This one made him hesitate. His business was built on secrets, on information carefully controlled and selectively shared. But finally, he nodded again. As much as I can without putting you in danger. I'll try. Then we'll try, I said, the words feeling both like a victory and a surrender. But Marco, I mean it. One step backward, one return to the way things were. And I'm gone. The bus to Oregon won't wait forever. I understand. He stood slowly, reluctance clear in every movement. I should let you sleep. We can talk more in the morning. Figure out what this looks like day to day. He was at the door when I called his name. Marco? Yes? The baby? I hesitated, then pushed forward. It's a girl. We're having a daughter. The expression that crossed his face was complex. Joy, terror, wonder, all mixed together. A daughter. I found out today. Was going to tell you, eventually. When I was safe somewhere you couldn't find us. He returned to the bed, sat down beside me again. May I? He gestured to my stomach, and when I nodded, his hand returned to rest there, but this time with a new tenderness. A daughter, he repeated, something like awe in his voice. I have a daughter. I corrected gently. We have a daughter. We have a daughter. He looked at me, and for the first time since our wedding, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Milena, I swear to you, I will spend every day proving I can be the father she deserves, the husband you deserve. Then start tomorrow, I said softly. Start by actually being present. He nodded, stood, moved toward the door, but this time when he reached the threshold, he turned back. Thank you. For what? For not getting on that bus, for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. After he left, I lay back on the bed, my hand resting where his had been, feeling the flutter of tiny life beneath. A daughter, our daughter, and a husband who was finally, maybe becoming more than a name on a contract. The next morning would tell me if his promises held weight, or if they were just more words spoken in the dark. But for tonight, for this moment, I let myself hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. But I was learning that sometimes the most dangerous things were also the most necessary. Outside, the spring rain began to fall, washing away the last remnants of winter. Inside, something new was beginning, fragile and uncertain, but alive. And for the first time in 18 months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could build something real from the ruins of our arrangement. Morning came with unexpected gentleness. Sunlight filtered through my curtains, and for the first time in months, I woke without the crushing weight of dread. The bus ticket sat on my nightstand, untorn. A choice made, for better or worse. I found Marco in the kitchen, not a place I'd ever seen him before. He was attempting to make coffee, his movements uncertain as he measured grounds, his suit jacket draped over a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up. "You're up early," I said from the doorway. He looked up, something vulnerable flashing across his face before he controlled it. "I wanted to be here, when you woke up, to prove I meant what I said." "It's coffee, Marco, not a grand gesture. It's a start." He poured 2 cups, remembered at the last second that I couldn't have caffeine, and sheepishly poured the second cup down the sink. "Tea? I can make my own tea." "I know you can. I'm asking if I can make it for you." The distinction mattered. I nodded, settling at the kitchen island, while he fumbled through cabinets looking for tea bags, for honey, for the right mug. It should have been simple. Instead, it was revelatory. Watching this powerful man who commanded an empire struggle with the domestic minutiae of making his wife tea. "You've never made tea before," I observed. "No. Maria always—" He caught himself. "I never bothered to learn. I'm realizing there are a lot of things I never bothered with." He set the mug in front of me, the water slightly too hot, the honey not quite dissolved. It was imperfect. It was also the most thoughtful thing he'd done in our entire marriage. "Thank you," I said softly. We sat in uncomfortable silence, 2 people trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without the carefully maintained distance we'd relied on for so long. "I've been thinking," Marco said finally, "about what you said, about honesty, about letting you into parts of my life I've kept separate. And I want to show you something. Today, if you're willing." "Show me what?" "My work, the legitimate parts. I want you to understand what I do beyond the rumors and whispers." I studied him over my tea. This was trust, I realized. A man who'd built his empire on secrecy, offering transparency. "All right." The Petrovic Industries headquarters was a gleaming tower downtown, all glass and steel and carefully projected legitimacy. Marco's hand rested at the small of my back as we entered, a familiar gesture, but different now, present instead of performative. His office occupied the entire top floor, with views of the city that would have been breathtaking if I hadn't been so focused on the man beside me. "This is where I spend most of my days," he said, gesturing to the space. "Import-export primarily, legal goods through legal channels, shipping routes, customs documentation, supplier negotiations. You're trying to convince me you're just a businessman. No." He met my eyes directly. "I'm trying to show you that part of what I do is just business, not all of it. I won't lie and say my empire is entirely clean. But it's not entirely dirty either. Why does that distinction matter? Because our daughter will inherit this." His hand moved to rest over mine, over my still flat stomach. "And I want her to inherit something she can be proud of, not just afraid of." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't performance. This was genuine concern for a child who wouldn't be born for months. "You're thinking about her," I said softly, "about what kind of father you'll be." "I think about nothing else. I've been thinking about it since the moment you confirmed the pregnancy. What kind of world I'm bringing her into. What she'll think of me when she's old enough to understand who I am. And what have you decided? That I need to be better. Not perfect. I'll never be that. But better than I've been. For her. For you." Over the following weeks, Marco began the slow, difficult work of dismantling the walls he'd built. He moved his things into my room, our room now, but slept on the chaise lounge those first nights, giving me space to adjust. He joined me for breakfast every morning, learning how I took my tea, what I liked to eat, the small rituals that made me who I was. He asked about my work, really asked, sitting in my sunroom studio while I sketched, genuinely interested in the minute details of botanical illustration that I'd never thought anyone cared about. "This one," he said, pointing to a detailed rendering of a rare orchid. "Why did you choose to show the root structure?" "Because that's where the real story is. Everyone sees the flower, the obvious beauty. But the roots tell you how it survives, how it anchors itself, how it draws sustenance from its environment." His eyes met mine. "Like people." "Yes, like people." The changes weren't all smooth. There were moments when he retreated into old patterns, when the coldness would creep back into his voice during a stressful phone call, when I'd see him close himself off, rebuilding those protective walls. Each time, I'd remind him of his promise. Each time, visibly struggling, he'd tear the walls back down. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted one night as we lay in the dark, him still on the chaise, me in the bed. "Be vulnerable. Let someone see my weaknesses. You're doing it right now. It feels like standing naked in a snowstorm." "It feels like that for me too." "Really?" He sounded surprised. "You seem so natural at this, at openness." "I'm not. I spent 18 months building my own walls, Marco. Learning not to need you, not to hope for anything from you. Tearing those down is just as hard." The honesty in the darkness created its own intimacy. Slowly, cautiously, we began to build something new. Not the cold arrangement we'd started with, but not yet the warm partnership we were reaching for. Something in between. Something fragile but growing. My body changed as the pregnancy progressed. The subtle curve became pronounced, undeniable. Marco's fascination with the changes bordered on reverent. He'd rest his hand on my stomach every night, feeling for the movements that grew stronger each week. "She kicked me," I told him one evening, his hand warm against my skin. "Let me feel." We waited together in the quiet, and when the flutter came, his face transformed with wonder. "That's our daughter." "That's our daughter," I confirmed. He leaned down, pressed his forehead against my stomach. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father. I know I haven't been very good at this so far, but I promise I'm trying. For you and your mother, I'm trying." The tenderness in his voice brought tears to my eyes. This was the man I'd married glimpses of, buried beneath layers of control and fear, but there, real, reachable. "Come to bed," I said softly. "Actually come to bed. Not the chaise." He looked up, uncertain. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." That night, for the first time since our wedding, we shared a bed with intention. Not from drunken desperation, but from genuine desire for closeness. He held me carefully, as if I might break, his hand resting protectively over our daughter. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair. "For what?" "For staying. For trying. For giving me a chance to be better. Thank you for trying to be better." We fell asleep like that, tangled together, building warmth where there had only been cold. The threats to his empire didn't disappear. There were still late-night phone calls, tense meetings, moments when danger brushed close. But now he told me about them, warned me when to stay home, explained the precautions, included me in the reality of his world instead of pretending I existed outside it. "Stanislav is making moves again," he said one morning over breakfast. "My sources say he's been talking to the Volkovs about an alliance. Is that dangerous? Potentially. I'm handling it." "How?" He hesitated, old instincts warring with new promises. "Business negotiations, reminders about boundaries, nothing you need to worry about." "But if it becomes something I need to worry about, you'll tell me?" "Yes." And I believed him. The Boston Botanical Society reached out about a commission, a series of illustrations for their upcoming rare species catalog. It was the kind of work I'd dreamed of before my marriage, prestigious and challenging. "You should take it," Marco said when I mentioned it. "It's a lot of hours, a lot of work. You love it. Why wouldn't you do it? I thought you wanted me available for your events, your appearances. I want you happy." He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "Take the commission. I'll adjust my schedule around yours for once." So I did. I threw myself into the work, documenting rare orchids and endangered ferns with painstaking detail. Marco would sit with me in the evenings, watching me work, occasionally asking questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand my passion. "You see the world differently than I do," he observed one night. "You see beauty in small things, details I'd miss. And you see connections, patterns, the big picture I sometimes lose in the details. Maybe that's why we work. Balance. Maybe." At 5 months pregnant, I attended my first gala since deciding to stay. This time, Marco's hand at my back felt different, present, connected. When people congratulated us on the pregnancy, his smile was genuine. "You're glowing," one of the other wives said. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." I looked at Marco, at the man who was trying so hard to be better, to be present, to be real. "It's getting there." That night, as we undressed for bed, he paused. "What did you mean earlier? That it's getting there?" "I meant that we're not there yet. Not at the marriage I dreamed of, but we're moving toward it, slowly." "Is slowly all right?" "Slowly is honest. Slowly is real. I'll take slow and real over fast and fake any day." He pulled me close, his hand splaying across my stomach where our daughter grew. "I love you," he said quietly. I don't think I've said that. Not directly. But I do. I love you, Milena. The words settled into my chest, warm and terrifying. I'm not there yet. I know, but I'm getting there, slowly. Slowly is enough. He kissed my forehead. Slowly is everything. The contractions started at 3 a.m, pulling me from sleep with breath-stealing intensity. Beside me, Marco woke immediately, his hand finding mine in the darkness. Is it time? I think so. He was out of bed instantly, moving with focused efficiency, grabbing the bag we'd packed weeks ago, calling Dr. Chen, alerting the driver. But his hand never left mine, except when absolutely necessary, anchoring me through each wave of pain. The birth was long and difficult. 18 hours of labor that tested every reserve of strength I possessed. Marco never left, never wavered, his presence a constant even when I screamed at him, blamed him, told him I hated him for doing this to me. I know, he said calmly, letting me squeeze his hand until I felt bones grind. I know, Lubavi. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. When our daughter finally entered the world with a furious cry, when Dr. Chen placed that tiny, perfect being on my chest, I watched Marco's face transform completely. The cold, controlled man I'd married was gone, replaced by someone vulnerable and awed and completely undone. She's perfect, he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Milena, she's perfect. Do you want to hold her? His hands trembled as he accepted our daughter, cradling her with exquisite gentleness. Hello, Teodora, he murmured. I'm your father. I've been waiting so long to meet you. Teodora. We'd chosen the name together weeks ago, lying in bed and testing options until we found one that felt right. Gift of God, it meant. Our miracle born from a frozen marriage that had finally learned to thaw. The first weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and feeding schedules, and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. Marco threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to his business empire, changing diapers and warming bottles and walking the floors at 2 a.m. when Teodora wouldn't settle. You're a natural, I observed one night, watching him rock our daughter. I'm terrified, he admitted, every moment. That I'll break her or fail her, or become the cold, distant father I swore I wouldn't be. You won't. You're here. That's what matters. Promise me something, Milena. What? Promise me that if you ever see me slipping back, if I start building those walls again, you'll call me on it. Don't let me retreat. Not from you, not from her. I promise. At Theodora's 6-week checkup, Dr. Chen pulled me aside. How are you doing, really? Exhausted, sore, overwhelmed. And your husband? I smiled, thinking of Marco singing lullabies in Serbian at 3 a.m, of the way he looked at our daughter like she'd hung the moon. He's amazing, involved and present and nothing like I expected. That's good. Some men struggle with the transition, but he seems genuinely committed. He is. He's trying so hard. Sometimes I see him catch himself retreating into old patterns, and then he'll stop, take a breath, and choose differently. Choose us. The first real test came when Theodora was 2 months old. A business deal gone wrong, a territory dispute that escalated into threats. Marco came home tense and distant, retreating into his office and closing the door. I found him there at midnight, staring at his laptop, his jaw tight. Talk to me. It's business, nothing for you to worry about. Marco. I crossed to him, placed my hand on his shoulder. That's the old pattern, the old way. Remember your promise? He closed his eyes, shoulders sagging. The Volkovs are pushing into the North Docks. It's territory I've controlled for years. If I don't push back, I look weak. If I do push back, it could get bloody. What are you going to do? I don't know. Every option feels like a failure of one kind or another. Then talk it through. Let me help you think. We stayed up until dawn, working through the problem together. I didn't have his knowledge of the criminal underworld, but I had perspective he lacked. In the end, he found a solution that held his territory without escalating to violence, a series of strategic alliances that rendered the Volkovs' play ineffective. You did that, I said when he told me the outcome days later. You found a way to be strong without being cruel. We did that. Your questions helped me see angles I'd missed. Then maybe this works both ways. Maybe we make each other better. Maybe we do. Theodora grew, changing daily, each development a small miracle. Her first smile at 6 weeks, directed at Marco as he sang to her. Her first laugh at 3 months, a sound that made both of us stop everything just to hear it again. The way she'd track us with her eyes, already learning the faces of the people who loved her most. On our 2nd anniversary, 2 years since that courthouse wedding, Marco surprised me with dinner on the mansion's terrace. Theodora asleep in her bassinet beside us, fairy lights strung overhead. 2 years, he said, pouring me wine, water for himself in solidarity with my months of abstinence. I was thinking about where we were this time last year, strangers living in the same house. And now? I looked at him across the candlelight, at the man who'd learned to be vulnerable, who checked on our sleeping daughter 3 times a night just to be sure she was breathing, who'd dismantled his own armor piece by painful piece to build something real with me. Now you're my best friend, my partner, the father of my child, my husband in every way that matters. Even love? His voice was careful, hopeful. Especially love. The words came easily now, truth instead of hope. I love you, Marco. Not the man you pretended to be. Not the powerful, controlled exterior, the real you. The one who's terrified of failing us but tries anyway. The one who sings Serbian lullabies at 3 a.m. The one who asks my opinion about business deals and actually listens. He came around the table, pulled me to my feet, held me close. I love you, Milena. I've loved you since before I knew how to admit it. Thank you for staying, for giving me the chance to become someone worthy of you. You were always worthy. You just had to let yourself be seen. His kiss was deep and tender, promise and gratitude mixed together. When we parted, Theodora had woken up, watching us with her father's gray eyes, curiosity bright in her tiny face. "Hello, sunshine," Marco said, lifting her gently. "Did we wake you?" She cooed at him, her small hand reaching for his face. And I watched my husband, my real husband now, melt completely under his daughter's attention. This was what I'd been reaching for all along. Not the cold arrangement, not the distant coexistence, but this. Warmth and presence and genuine connection. Love born not from passion or convenience, but from two people choosing each other daily, choosing to tear down walls and build something better. The Botanical Society Commission had led to others. I worked from my sunroom studio while Theodora napped, Marco often joining us, answering emails while I sketched, creating a quiet domesticity I'd never imagined when I'd stood in that courthouse wearing a department store dress. "Do you ever regret it?" Marco asked one evening. "The way we started? The arrangement?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain, the loneliness of that first year. But I don't regret where we ended up. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations." That's very philosophical for someone covered in spit up. I looked down at my shoulder where Theodora had just deposited her evening feeding. Parenthood and philosophy go hand in hand. Both involve accepting that you control nothing and everything simultaneously. Spoken like a true botanical illustrator. What does that mean? It means you see the whole ecosystem, not just the individual parts, but how they all connect and depend on each other. That's what we are now, an ecosystem. You, me, Theodora, all connected, all dependent on each other, all necessary for the system to thrive. When did you get so poetic? When I fell in love with an artist. It's contagious. 3 years into our marriage, with Theodora taking her first steps between us, shrieking with delight each time she made it across the living room, I finally understood what I'd been missing that first year. Marriage wasn't a contract or an arrangement, or a convenient solution to a problem. Marriage was two people choosing each other repeatedly, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. It was vulnerability and trust built slowly over time. It was learning someone's tea preferences and middle-of-the-night fears. It was watching them become a parent and discovering new depths you'd never imagined. It was Marco, once cold and distant, now lying on the floor making ridiculous faces to make our daughter laugh. It was me, once planning escape routes, now planning our future together. It was both of us, learning daily how to be better than we were, for each other, and for the tiny person who'd given us both a reason to try. Mama. Theodora's first clear word, arms outstretched, toddling toward me. I scooped her up, breathing in her perfect baby smell, and caught Marco's eyes across the room. The love there was clear, uncomplicated, everything we'd fought to build. "I'm glad I stayed," I told him later, after Theodora was asleep, wrapped in his arms in our bed. "I'm glad I gave you a reason to. You gave me several. Theodora, yourself, when you finally let me see you. This life we're building. It's not perfect, no, but it's ours, and it's real, and it's enough. More than enough," he agreed, his hand finding mine, our fingers interlacing with the easy familiarity of long practice. More than I ever deserved, but everything I ever needed. Outside our window, spring rain began to fall, washing away the last traces of winter's ice. Inside, wrapped in warmth we'd created together, we slept soundly. A family born from cold, but flourishing in the warmth we'd learned to generate ourselves. The arrangement had become a marriage. The marriage had become love. and love had become everything.